The roar of motorcycles echoed through the quiet backroads, their engines screaming into the night. A gang of outlaw bikers, known for causing trouble wherever they went, had stopped at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. They were loud, reckless, and fueled by the kind of arrogance that made them believe they were untouchable. But that night, their cruelty reached a new level. Among their twisted amusements was a police K9, a loyal and highly trained German shepherd named Shadow. He had been separated from his handler during a high-speed chase, and the gang had found him injured and alone. Instead of helping, they laughed, seeing it as an opportunity for entertainment. They taunted him, pushed him around, and treated him like just another thing to destroy. What they didn't realize, what they had no way of knowing, was that this wasn't just any dog, and his trainer wasn't just any cop. Detective Jake Calloway had been with Shadow since the dog was a pup. They had trained together, worked together, and saved each other more times than he could count. Shadow wasn't just a K9 unit, he was family. And when Calloway learned what had happened, something in him snapped. The bikers thought they had gotten away with it, laughing as they rode off into the night, but they had just made a mistake that would change everything. Calloway wasn't the kind of man to let things slide. He knew these roads, these people, and how to track them better than anyone. As he stood in the dim glow of a street lamp, holding Shadow's torn collar in his hands, his jaw clenched. The bikers thought they were the hunters. They had no idea that now they were the prey. With every clue he uncovered, every name he crossed off his list, Calloway got one step closer. The bikers had no idea what was coming, and when they finally realized, it would be far too late. Calloway barely slept that night. His mind was too busy running through every detail, every lead, every possible clue that could point him in the right direction. Shadow had been more than just a partner. He had been a lifeline, a loyal friend in a job that didn't leave much room for trust. Now, the thought of those bikers using him as a plaything, hurting him for their own amusement, made Calloway's blood boil. He wasn't just angry. He was determined. By sunrise, he was already on the move. The town wasn't big, and the outlaw bikers weren't exactly careful about covering their tracks. Calloway had dealt with them before: petty crimes, bar fights, illegal street races, but this was different. This was personal. He started where he always did, the places where people talked. A rundown gas station on the edge of town, where bikers often stopped to refuel and brag about their latest antics, seemed like a good place to begin. The attendant, an old man with a permanent frown and tired eyes, barely looked up when Calloway walked in, but when he saw the detective's expression, his face changed. "Something happened?" the old man asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Calloway placed Shadow's torn collar on the counter. "You seen any of 'em come through here last night?" The old man sighed, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Couple of 'em. Loud, drunk. They were laughing about something. Said they found themselves a new toy, but wouldn't say what it was." His voice lowered. Looked like they'd been out near the old mill. That was all Calloway needed. He nodded, thanked the man, and walked back to his car, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The old mill. It had been abandoned for years, a forgotten structure swallowed by weeds and decay. It was the perfect place for criminals to hide out, a place where no one would hear a dog's cries for help. Calloway's gut told him Shadow had been there, that the bikers had left behind more than just their laughter. He drove fast, his mind racing through what he might find. The truth was, he wasn't just looking for evidence. He was looking for justice. And if the bikers thought they could escape it, they were dead wrong. The road to the old mill was barely more than a dirt path, overgrown and uneven, but Calloway didn't slow down. His headlights cut through the early morning fog, illuminating the crumbling remains of what used to be a thriving factory. Now, it was nothing but rusted metal and broken windows, a ghost of its former self. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. As he stepped out of his car, the air was thick with silence. Too quiet. Calloway's instincts told him that whatever had happened here wasn't over. He moved carefully, scanning the ground for any sign of shadow, paw prints, fur, anything. Then he saw it, a piece of torn fabric, caught on a jagged piece of metal near the entrance. It was dark, almost black, but under the faint light of dawn he recognized it. Shadow's harness. His pulse quickened as he crouched down, fingertips brushing over the rough material. Shadow had fought. He had tried to get away. That meant he was still alive when they left him here. But where did they take him? Calloway gritted his teeth. He wasn't leaving without answers. The mill smelled of damp wood and rusted iron, the floor covered in years of dust and grime. He moved through the shadows, every step calculated. Then he spotted something that stopped him cold, a stack of empty beer cans near a burned-out fire pit. Someone had been here recently. Someone had stayed. He took another step, and the floor creaked beneath him. The sound was small, but in the silence, it was enough. A faint rustling came from the darkness ahead, followed by a voice, low and groggy. "Who's there?" Calloway froze, pressing himself against the wall. He wasn't alone. The voice came again, closer this time. "That you, Riggs? You finally bring food." Calloway didn't answer. He peered around the corner and saw a man slumped against a pile of old wooden crates, rubbing his eyes. One of the bikers. His jacket had the gang's insignia stitched on the back, a black skull with wings. Calloway recognized it immediately. These guys had been on his radar for years, but this one, he was young, sloppy, probably lower rank, and right now half asleep. Calloway knew he had one shot at this. He stepped forward, letting the dim light catch his face. The biker blinked, confusion flickering in his tired eyes. "Whoa." Before he could finish, Calloway grabbed him by the front of his jacket and yanked him forward. "Where is he?" His voice was low, steady. The biker's dazed expression twisted into something else. Fear. He had just woken up, but now he was wide awake. He swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the door. I don't know what you're talking about, man." Calloway tightened his grip. Wrong answer. The biker winced, shifting under the detective's hold. "Look, I don't know, all right? They don't tell me anything. I just go where they say." Calloway narrowed his eyes. "Then tell me where they went." The biker hesitated, glancing around as if hoping someone would save him. No one was coming. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "They left last night. Said they were heading to the ridge, up near the old train tunnels. That's all I know, I swear." Calloway studied him for a moment, then let go. The biker stumbled back, rubbing his throat. "You better not be lying," Calloway warned. "Because if I find out you are, I'll be back. And next time, I won't be asking." The biker just nodded, too scared to speak. Calloway didn't wait. He turned on his heel and walked out, his mind already racing. The ridge. The tunnels. He had been there before. Remote, dangerous, the kind of place no one went unless they had something to hide. Shadow was still out there, and Calloway was getting closer. The road to the ridge was nothing more than a twisting path of dirt and gravel, cutting through thick woods that swallowed the last traces of daylight. Calloway drove fast, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Every second that passed was another second Shadow was out there, alone, hurt, maybe worse. His headlights barely pierced the darkness as he approached the base of the ridge. The old train tunnels were hidden deep in the hills, forgotten relics of a railway long abandoned. Few people even knew they existed, but Calloway had been there once, years ago, chasing down fugitives who thought the tunnels made the perfect hideout. Back then, he had been the hunter. Now he was again. He killed the engine before he reached the clearing, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind carried the distant hum of crickets and rustling leaves, but beneath that, something else. Voices, faint, but close. Calloway moved low, sticking to the shadows as he made his way through the trees. The moonlight barely touched the ground here, but his eyes had adjusted, scanning every movement. Then he saw them. 3 figures stood near the entrance to the tunnel, their motorcycles parked in a loose circle. A fire burned between them, casting flickering shadows against the cracked stone walls. They were talking, laughing, but Calloway wasn't focused on them. His eyes locked onto a small, caged trailer hitched to one of the bikes. And inside it, movement. Shadow. Calloway felt a surge of relief so sharp it almost knocked the breath from his chest. The dog was alive. He could see the shape of him, curled up, his fur matted with dirt. But he wasn't moving much. Too still, too quiet. One of the bikers kicked a rock toward the cage, chuckling. Ain't much fight left in him now, huh? Another one smirked. Bet the boss is gonna love what we brought him. Should be here any minute. Calloway's jaw clenched. There wasn't time to wait. If more of them were coming, he needed to act now. But 3 against 1, with Shadow locked up, made things tricky. He didn't have the advantage, yet. Carefully, he reached for his belt, feeling for the small utility knife he always carried. He needed to get closer. If he could take them by surprise, maybe he had a shot. Then, a snap. A single twig beneath his boot. The laughter stopped. The bikers turned, eyes narrowing into the darkness. "You hear that?" one of them muttered. Calloway froze, heart hammering. He was out of time. And just like that, the hunt had begun. One of the bikers stepped forward, his hand drifting toward his belt, where a knife gleamed under the firelight. His eyes scanned the tree line, suspicion creeping into his expression. "Who's out there?" he called, his voice sharp, cutting through the night. Calloway didn't move. His pulse pounded in his ears as he calculated his next move. He had planned on taking them by surprise, but now they were on high alert. If he made one wrong step, he'd lose any chance of getting to Shadow before reinforcements arrived. The second biker, taller and built like a bulldozer, picked up a flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam swept across the ground, inching closer to where Calloway stood hidden. He had seconds, maybe less. Then, just as the light was about to catch him, something shifted in the trees behind them. A rustling, quick and deliberate. The bikers spun around, momentarily distracted. Calloway knew better than to believe in luck. Someone else was out there, and whoever it was, they had just changed the game. "Riggs, that you?" The first biker called toward the darkness. No answer. The taller one cursed under his breath. "I don't like this, man." Calloway stayed low, using the distraction to inch closer. He could see Shadow now, his ears barely flicking at the commotion. The dog was weak, but alive. That was all that mattered. Then another sound, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. A steady crunch of boots against gravel. Slow, purposeful. Someone was walking toward them. The bikers tensed, weapons halfway drawn. "All right, enough screwing around," one of them growled. "Whoever's out there, show yourself." A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the firelight. Calloway stiffened. He hadn't expected this. The man was older, dressed in a worn-out leather jacket with the same winged skull emblem stitched on the back. His face was lined, his eyes sharp. He carried himself like someone who had seen too much, done too much. A leader. One of the bikers shifted uneasily. "Boss, what are you doing here already?" The older man ignored him. His gaze locked onto the cage, then flicked toward the woods, exactly where Calloway was hidden. And then he smirked. Calloway's stomach dropped. The man knew. Somehow, he knew Calloway was there. And worse, he wasn't surprised. This wasn't just a simple gang operation anymore. Calloway had just walked into something much bigger. And now he wasn't the only one hunting. He was being hunted too. Calloway's breath was steady, but his mind raced. The gang leader's smirk wasn't the kind that came from confidence. It was the kind that came from knowing something no one else did. "I was wondering when you'd show up," the older man said, voice calm, almost amused. "A cop like you. Couldn't let this go." Calloway didn't respond. His grit on the knife tightened as he glanced at Shadow. The dog was watching now, barely lifting his head, but those familiar brown eyes still held a flicker of fight. Calloway wasn't leaving without him. The older man took a step forward, gesturing casually to the other bikers. "You boys did a real sloppy job covering your tracks. Figured we'd get company sooner or later." He tilted his head. "But I'll admit, I was hoping it'd be you, detective." The way he said it sent a chill down Calloway's spine. This wasn't just some random gang leader. This was personal. "You know who I am," Calloway said, voice low. "Oh, I know plenty," the man replied. "Jake Calloway, the cop who doesn't know when to quit. The one who took down the Cartwrights. The one who put my brother behind bars." His smile faded. "You made a lot of enemies, Calloway." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a gang messing around. This was payback. The bikers tensed, waiting for a signal. The fire crackled, shadows shifting across their faces. Calloway's options were running out. Then, a sound. A low growl. Shadow. Weak or not, the dog still had fight left in him. And that was all Calloway needed. The moment of hesitation was enough. Calloway moved first, lunging forward. He knocked the nearest biker off balance, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The second one barely had time to react before Calloway struck him hard, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. The leader didn't flinch. Instead, he chuckled. "That all you got?" Then, headlights. Bright, blinding, cutting through the darkness. Tires screeched against gravel as another vehicle barreled into the clearing. The bikers turned, momentarily disoriented. Calloway took his chance. He sprinted toward the cage, fumbling with the latch. Shadow whined, weak but responsive, and the second the door swung open, the dog staggered out. The leader took a step forward, hand drifting toward his jacket, where Calloway knew a weapon waited. But before he could reach it, another voice cut through the chaos. "Hands where I can see 'em." Flashlights cut through the night as officers poured in, weapons drawn. The bikers froze. The leader exhaled sharply, lifting his hands. "You had backup," he muttered. Calloway, still kneeling beside Shadow, let out a breath. "Always do." As the officers secured the scene, Calloway placed a hand on Shadow's back, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing. Bruised, battered, but alive. Then, one final twist. As the gang leader was led away, he turned back, eyes locking onto Calloway. "You think this is over," he said, voice steady. "You don't even know what you just stepped into." Calloway met his gaze. "I don't need to. You're done." But something in the man's expression lingered. A promise. A warning. As Calloway lifted Shadow into his arms, carrying him towards safety, he knew this wasn't just about one gang. This was just the beginning. The night air felt heavier now, thick with the smell of dirt and smoke as Calloway carried Shadow toward his car. The dog was weak, but his breathing was steady, his head resting against Calloway's arm. It had been close, too close. As he laid Shadow gently in the backseat, the sound of police radios crackled in the distance. Officers moved through the clearing, securing the remaining bikers, collecting evidence, and making sure no one slipped away. The gang leader, still handcuffed, stood near one of the patrol cars, watching Calloway with an unreadable expression. Calloway didn't look away. He had spent years hunting criminals like this, the kind who believed they were untouchable. Some of them learned the hard way. Others, like this one, would never stop thinking they had another move to play. Detective Harper, one of Calloway's longtime colleagues, approached, hands on her hips. "You look like hell," she said, glancing at Shadow. "Both of you." Calloway exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "We'll live." She nodded, looking over at the arrested bikers. "We've been building a case on these guys for months. Tonight gave us exactly what we needed to shut them down for good." Calloway wanted to believe that, but the leader's final words stuck with him. Something about the way he said it, the certainty in his voice, it wasn't just talk. Harper seemed to read his mind. "You think there's more to this?" Calloway looked down at Shadow, gently running a hand over the dog's fur. "There's always more." She sighed. We'll dig deeper. But for now, you should get that dog checked out. And maybe yourself too. Calloway gave a tired smirk. One thing at a time. The drive back was quiet, the weight of the night settling in. When they finally reached home, Calloway helped Shadow inside, laying down a blanket for him to rest. The dog curled up, exhausted but safe. As Calloway sat beside him, he felt the familiar pull of exhaustion, but also something else, relief. They had made it. He scratched behind Shadow's ears. "We're not done, boy," he murmured, but was still standing. Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor, a small but certain sign of life. For now, that was enough.